Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome back to tonight's second half. Before we get into it, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. My merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe, click the like button, and please leave a comment. It really does help, and it matters. And now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with tonight's second half, shall we? Today's second half is going to be dedicated to a subscriber who just passed away, Terry. Terry was Jody's brother. He had been on the show and shared some of his encounters with us. Very nice guy, and he will be missed. So this one's for you, Terry. Tonight's second half is going to be some creepy video footage that I've located and some real creepy encounters. Let's get into them. Tonight's first encounter. It was in 1977 as a high schooler in the state of Maryland that my friends and I, as well as many other classmates, would frequent an area that had somewhat of a reputation for being a hangout, both before and after the sun went down. It was in late May of that year, with all of the students just itching to get outside any time they could, having endured a rough winter, that a buzz started going around the school about some of the kids saying they had seen a monster or something of the sort while at the hangout. Having said as much, there were a lot of bad drugs around at that point, and I knew that a fair number of the students were sampling them, with some of them having died for their efforts, which was a crying shame. Nevertheless, when I heard the rumor, my first question was who started it. My thoughts were that someone was suffering from some type of drug-induced hallucination, which rendered them seeing a monster in the woods. Suffice to say, myself and some other non-druggies were still frequenting the spot, but amazingly, the amount of young people who still came there had greatly diminished after the rumor had made its way around the campus. It was a Friday night, and 7 of us piled into my friend Jay's van, and we headed over to the spot. Jay's parents were quite wealthy and bought him a brand new conversion van, complete with chairs, bed, table, stereo. All of us were piled in, sitting at the end of this dead-end street for the evening. Having arrived just before sunset, we were all outside in the open lot, having a catch game with several frisbees until the sun had set, listening to music and having a good time. Now, I didn't drink or do anything at the time, and all of us were underage anyway, but my friend Wendy had gone into town and, without being proofed by the owner of the liquor store, had procured a bottle of this pre-mixed screwdriver crap. Basically, it was vodka and orange juice, and she drank the entire pint warm. It was about an hour after sunset. Wendy went outside into the edge of the trees and began to puke her brains out. Suddenly, she let out a scream and came running across the front of the van, leaping into the side door, saying there was some type of creature in the woods. And with all of us trying to come to grips with what she was jabbering about, Jay, who was sitting in the driver's seat, suddenly shouts, "Oh, crap!" and threw the headlights on, illuminating this monstrosity of a beast at the edge of the tree line. As soon as the lights hit it, the creature raised its arm to shield its eyes from the lights, and all of the girls screamed. Literally a second later, the monster dropped its arm and made a loud snarling sound, and took 2 steps toward the front hood of the van. Jay basically started the van and dropped it into reverse as fast as it could possibly be done, and everyone in the van went flying and tumbling around as he floored the van, first in reverse and then in drive. This thing that we had all seen appeared to be half man, half goat. It was covered sparsely in what I would say was hair, and had a large pair of horns, which curved from the upper forehead to the back of its head. It had very long ears and came to a point at the top. Its face was long and narrow, also ending in somewhat of a pointed-looking chin. Its nose and eyebrows looked like they were connected in the form of a protruding type of ridge, with its nose having many distinct wrinkles on it. When it snarled, kind of like a timber wolf when it growls, it was very frightening to say the least. The body was extremely muscular, coming from the chest down to a very lean and tapered waistline, and its legs were long and skinny but equally muscular in appearance. The eyes in the headlights were glowing fluorescent green, and its snout seemed to be angled downward, beginning just below the eyes, in such a way that when it snarled we couldn't see its teeth. None of us ever went back there again, and to this day I'm still left wondering what exactly it was that I saw that night in Maryland. Alright guys, the first video clip we're going to check out is a video clip of a group of kids or young adults walking through the woods, what looks to be a fire trail or just a regular trail. They come to this secluded spot and they see something peering out from behind a tree, and then less than a second later it peers out from the same tree, opposite side and higher off the ground than the initial sighting. So it's pretty eerie. The eyes are glowing. I'm not really sure what to make of it, but that's what I leave it up to you guys to decide for yourselves. Check it out. Alright guys, that video definitely has a creep factor to it. You definitely can see the creature and its kind of glowing eyes peek out from a lower section of the tree, and then a second later on the other side of the tree peek out again. And then you see the teenagers or young adults take off running. I didn't leave the sound on because it was just all explicit F's and F's. So you can definitely tell they are kids, not kids, but either teenagers or young adults. But it definitely does have a creep factor. So I've got my kind of guess on what's going on, but I'd like to hear yours in the comment section. Let's get into tonight's second encounter. It was 2014 that my friend Dennis and I had gone to the Atchafalaya swamp to go fishing for some catfish. The swamp is in south central Louisiana, where the Atchafalaya River meets the Gulf of Mexico. As I recall, it was about 8:30 in the morning when we began to hear what sounded like violent splashing occurring somewhere in the swamp, out of our view behind us. Dennis and I were laughing, saying that it was a couple of gators were really going at it, and we kept fishing. The thrashing continued for about a half an hour or so, with us hearing it intermittently, say every few minutes. We decided to have a look-see at what all the commotion was behind us. So we pulled our lines up and began to row as quietly as we could in the direction of the sound. Now I was doing the rowing while Dennis had his eyes peeled as to what was ahead of us. In other words, my back was to whatever the commotion was as I rowed the boat. I must have rowed a couple 100 feet when I heard kablam. That's my way of describing what sounded like a belly flop in the swimming pool. As soon as I heard it, Dennis's eyes lit up. Holy crap, man, it's a swamp monster. I pulled the oars in and twisted on the seat to see what he was looking at, and as I did, there was a huge beast thrashing around in the shallows, pounding its arms and fists down into the water. It was giving something a beat down, that's for sure, and seemed to be totally unaware of our presence. About 15 seconds later, this beast stood to its feet holding a dead alligator gar that must have been 4 feet long in its fist. When it stood up, it was only in 3 feet of water, with its back facing us, and Dennis knocked his knee against the oar, making a sound. The monster flipped around to face us in a split second and showed us its teeth. Standing there, soaking wet, its hair was slicked to its body, and man, oh man, was this thing built. It looked like the king of the strong man, I can tell you that for sure. At about 200 feet, all I could see around its eyes were deep, black sockets, and the ugliest looking puss you had ever seen on a man or beast. This thing was butt ugly and nasty looking. It turned and took 2 fast leaps into the woods while holding the gar and was gone. So help me God, there was nobody in these parts except guys like us who know where we are going and how to get out. There is so much danger in here, and it's so difficult to access that nobody comes in here except for the locals. These alligator gars can lie in the shallows, and this monster was what we heard before actually seeing him. He was lying flat out on his belly, punching the crap out of this fish when we set eyes on him. He must have dove headlong into the water, landing on top of the gar, and started beating the crap out of it. The water on the edge is 2 or 3 feet deep, that I'm sure of, and it came up to this monster's knees when it stood there. It had to be 7 to 9 feet tall, I can guarantee you that. We could hear it leaving the area because you cannot just walk on land. It's water and marsh in every direction, loaded with gators and snakes that'll do you in quick. I have no idea how this thing lives in there without being killed, but there it was, a giant swamp monster. Every swamper has heard tales of these things, but never had either of us thought that we would see one for ourselves, eye to eye. Now we had. Word spread fast when we reached shore. In the next few weeks and months, everyone we knew was in there trying to get a look, but nobody saw anything. I guess it was a one-shot deal, and we had that shot. Alright guys, the next video clip is a audible clip. It's some kind of, I don't know, the person said human animalistic sound. It's not loud, but it is loud enough to where you'll be able to hear it. There is, once again, no visual. It's all audio. Here it is. Tonight's third encounter. Back in 1962, my family was living in the outskirts of Toronto, Canada. We regularly hunted and fished in many locations in the province. One of our favorite locations was Shenango Lake area, north of Follett. This was one of our best locations for fishing walleye, perch, and northerns. However, this time around it was for a moose hunt. The trip was a 450-mile run by car to a train station, where we climbed aboard a Canadian National Railway with our gear. The train stopped at our destination, where we hooked up with a camp owner who brought us to our accommodations for the week. This entire region is loaded with outlying lakes and beautiful timber, which was a perfect habitat for moose. When we fished here, we typically rented a motorboat and would regularly see moose foraging by the side of the lake. Many times we would see them enter into the lake to eat bottom vegetation. This trip, however, was to be taken on foot with two different guides. My father and I went with Pierre, and my uncle was with a guy named Rolf. For me, the plan was to spend alternating days with either my uncle or dad. Both of our guides were using what is known as a bugle. I don't recall exactly what it was, but my recollection was that it was a large animal horn of some sorts. It actually required some skill and expertise to produce the proper sound when blowing into it. But when it was done right, it would call a moose into the location where you were at. It was on the third day of the trip that we had hiked into Lye Lake in hopes of finding some larger moose. On that day, it was to be my dad and me working the southern tip of the lake, while my uncle and Rolf worked the northern end of that lake. We were seeing moose, but according to the guides, there were larger bulls that were well worth the extra effort of finding, and so we followed their lead. My dad didn't talk much about the money, but at the time I knew it was costing him a pretty penny to be here, and I was happy they had spent it. We spent the entire day working the edge of the lake and had once again passed on what I thought was some really decent-looking bull. We spent the entire day working the edge of the lake and had once again passed on what I thought was some really decent-looking bull. It was on day 4 that we were hiking north up an old logging road, with our destination being Frank Lake. My dad and Pierre had split off from us to continue on to Frank Lake, and we were going with Rolf northwest to Rocky Lake. Our plan for today was to divide and conquer. At least that's what Rolf had said. When we were closing in on the southern end of the lake, Rolf said quietly that he'd heard something. He said that we were going to sit tight where we were and start calling. It was amazing to me what these professionals were capable of in the woods. I say this because my uncle and I had heard nothing. Rolf had started bugling in a usual fashion. After 30 minutes or so, we started to hear some loud crashing and crunching in the woods, and he just smiled. It sounded like an elephant was smashing its way through the timber, and we were smiling from ear to ear in anticipation of seeing this creature that was capable of making such a commotion. Over the past 3 days, we had heard nothing like this, and we had seen many large moose. Whatever this was that was responding to that bugle had to have been immense, and yet we hadn't seen anything as of yet. Suddenly, everything went silent, and I could tell by the facial expressions of Ralph that he was puzzled over this sudden stoppage of movement in the timber. It remained as was for about 20 minutes as Rolf continued to bugle intermittently. It was then that we heard what sounded like a tree trashing about ahead of us. That was accompanied by some very deep guttural grunting sounds. The sound was unlike anything we had ever heard previous, being made by a moose, and yet we still had seen nothing. Now, everything that I am about to say from here on in happened very quickly. All of our attention had been drawn to looking at and listening to this commotion that was coming from directly in front of us. Prior to the silence, when suddenly my uncle had turned to his left and whispered, "Oh my God, what is that?" We all turned and beheld this enormous ape-looking creature that was standing in the fringes of the timber, parting some low brush with his hands to look at us. We had heard nothing coming from this side whatsoever up till that point when my uncle said, "Oh my God." This gorilla or monster must have been 12 feet tall and stood there staring at us while rocking from side to side. It seemed to have no fear of us whatsoever and maintained its position as we did as well. Rolf had chambered around and held his gun at the ready in the direction of this creature. I don't know why he didn't shoot, but he held his gun in a way that I thought he was going to. No sooner had he raised his gun than did the beast retreat into the woods, and we could hear nothing. What surprised us all was that something so large could sneak up on us and retreat with such stealth. It was after 5 minutes that the woods in front of us erupted with the sounds of thrashing and crashing once again. As soon as the noise subsided, a roar of immense volume came from out of the trees. It was so loud that it made my cheeks quiver. I can tell you right now that at that time I was scared to death. What we had seen was so large and formidable of a creature, I thought it was going to kill us, with guns or without. This roar went on for 20 seconds and then stopped. It was then that Rolf said, "It's time to go." We started to make our way the way out we had came. The whole time we could hear activity in the timber to our left. This creature was following us. My uncle and Rolf were both holding their guns in a way that indicated they were ready to shoot if need be at any time. We were about a mile away from where we had parted ways with my dad and Pierre, and about halfway through the hike when the noises to our left ceased. We were almost at a fork where we split up, when my dad and Pierre appeared, walking in our direction. As we met up, they said, "We were coming to help. We heard a roar and thought you guys might be in trouble, but there was no gunfire." We started to explain to them all that had happened, from hearing the trees and the rustling and seeing the monster standing there near us. Pierre started asking Rolf about the nature of what he had encountered, being puzzled by what we were saying. He thought that we may have encountered a large bear. Rolf told him it was a huge, hair-covered monster, similar to a man and an ape in one. He described it as being well over 4 meters tall and perhaps 2 meters at the shoulders. Its body appeared to be extremely muscular, as we witnessed by its ability to shake the large trees. Ralph told them that it had extremely large hands, dark skin with black dead man's eyes, as he called them. Pierre then said it sounded like we had encountered a hairy man of the woods. Never had either of them encountered such a creature before, although they were both in agreement that they now knew what the roars were, having heard them before many times. The hands on this monster hung to its knee level, and its upper thighs were about 16 inches broad from frontal view. The upper torso formed a perfect V shape from the waist up. Its nose was broad and flat, with hair coming into both sides of its face, as well as hanging from its chin like a ragged beard. The most horrific part of the entire encounter was when the roar emanated through the trees. The beast couldn't have been more than 150 feet away when it erupted into those screams. As it went on, I felt as though it was damaging me. It was actually penetrating my body in a way that made me think that my heart was going to completely stop. I can't explain it to you in any other way than it was absolutely terrifying in every sense of the word. We ended our trip by tagging out down near the camp, having seen nor heard anything more of this hideous beast. And the last video is apparently some sort of creature that was in some trees, and a gentleman took this video. It's about a minute and 30 seconds long. At the very end, though, I can see that it's definitely something there with a very distinct outline of a face. You guys give it a look, see. I do see something in those trees. I don't know what it is. One person talking about the video clip said they saw kind of like a white crawler-like creature. I see a completely different kind of face at the end. I don't have an answer, and I don't have a clue, but it's pretty interesting. And with that, my friends, I hope you enjoyed tonight's upload as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. Everyone stay safe, and please have a wonderful evening. May the Great Spirit watch over us all, and may He guide us down that path that we call life.